Now you know how aperture, shutter speed, and ISO affect your exposure. But how do you actually decide what to change in different situations? This is what we'll call the exposure triangle, and putting it all together. There is a balance between these three settings. Changing one might affect how you change the other. Also, depending on creative choices like having an open aperture to get a blurry background or using a super fast shutter speed to capture still motion, your other settings will have to compromise to make sure things are properly exposed. So let's go out in the field in 3 different situations to walk through how we make those decisions.
So we're out here in this park, we're gonna get a couple portraits, but first I'm going to get a sort of just standard nature shot. This might be a great thing for you to try to go out and capture. Go out to a park or in the city, just get some shots of some plants. They're the easiest subjects to work with. So I brought out the Canon Rebel T5i. I'm on a 55 to 250 millimeter lens, and I just turned on my camera and I didn't set the settings before here. So this is basically what you're probably going to be doing. You're gonna open your camera, see what the settings are. I'm at 1/250th of a shutter, f7.1, and ISO 100. Since I am outside during the day, the first thing I will do is typically drop my ISO to 100 or to something very low, whatever the lowest is that your camera goes to. Most go down to 100. So that is really kind of the first thing that I would do anyway. So that's on the right setting. And then I would just use my exposure meter. I'm gonna just see one of these kind of cool bushy flower things, get pretty close up and see where I'm at. So I'm pretty close, so I have to back up to get in focus. Okay, so I'm very underexposed right now. I'm at a f7.1, 1/250th of a shutter, and ISO 100. Let's see what that looks like. And it's way too dark. So the first thing I'm going to do is open up my aperture. I wouldn't mind a shallower depth of field anyways. So let's drop that down to f4.0, which I believe is the widest this lens will go open to. So now I'm gonna take another test shot. It's still a little bit too dark. Because my shutter speed is at 1/250th, I'm pretty confident I can drop that down and not get any sort of motion blur. Gonna go down to 1/80th, f4.0, ISO 100, and that is actually really well exposed. So in terms of exposure, I'm happy with that. Next, I would play around with the composition a little bit, but for now, I'm pretty happy with these settings. I'm gonna zoom in just a little bit to get a little tighter, and it looks solid. In the same setting, I like these plants, but everything is in the shade. I want a little bit more contrast, so I'm gonna go over there where the sun is shining on the leaves just a little bit more, and then we'll see what it looks like there. So it's pretty sunny, so there's a lot of sun on my eyes, and I know automatically that I'm probably going to adjust my settings because there's a lot more light on this plant right here. Because I can't adjust my ISO down any further to make it darker, I could crank up my f-stop, but I don't want to lose that shallow depth of field. So what I'm now gonna do is adjust my shutter, making my shutter even faster to let in less light. I went from 1/80th to about 1/320th of a second, and that looks pretty good. The only thing, or the only issue is that we're getting a lot of sunlight. It's very contrasty. We got some shadows, which I actually like, but the reading on my camera was a little bit too overexposed. So I'm actually going to drop a little bit further, 1/500th of a second shutter speed, take the shot, and that's pretty interesting. So you can see that even just moving a few feet away with the same subject, the lighting was really different and I had to adjust my settings. But with this situation, I basically, being outside with a lot of bright light, my ISO I set to the lowest possible. Then I adjusted my f-stop to the depth of field that I like. And then I used my shutter to basically compensate to expose properly. Okay, so we're here on the other side of the park. I've got Will here and we're gonna take a standard sort of portrait. I've still got my same settings from before, so 1/500th of a second shutter, f4.0, and ISO 100. So since we're in the shade, compared to the previous situation, it's way underexposed. So I'm going to drop my shutter speed to let in more light. So I'm slowing down my shutter from 1/500th. Let's go to 1/100th. All right, that's actually exposed relatively nicely on Will's face. but the background is completely overblown. But of course, in this situation, I do want to expose to Will's face. I'm gonna take one more shot, and I'm also gonna get it a little bit higher. And I'm gonna slow down my shutter just a little bit to 1/60th of a second. Still, I think I can deal with this, no camera shake. Let's do one more. I might have got a tiny bit of motion blur from my hands, but the exposure was nice. So what I want to actually do is speed up my shutter to back to 1/100th, but I need to brighten it up a little bit. So I can't open up my aperture anymore. So the only thing I have left to do with my camera is to increase my ISO. So I'm going to increase ISO from 100 to 200. And that's a lot better. The background is still really bright, but we're exposing to Will, and the exposure on his face looks pretty good for me. So as you can see in this example, what I had to do was increase my ISO because I didn't have enough light to be able to hold my camera steady enough with that slower shutter speed. So if you run into that situation and you can't let in more light with your aperture, the ISO might be the only way to go. Here we're in our last location for our exposure triangle demos. Will is still my subject. We're gonna take another portrait. What's interesting is he's still in the shade, but there's a lot of light coming from behind him. The sun is a backlight. We're gonna talk more about lighting in a future section. I've also swapped lenses to this nice little pancake 24mm lens, which allows me to open up my aperture a bit more. So I know for this portrait, I'm going to open up my aperture as wide as possible so I can get the most shallow depth of field. So I'm gonna start by doing that. I'm going from an f4.0, which were the settings for the old lens, opening up to an f2.8. I already know that I'm going to be too bright, so what I'm going to also do is drop my ISO back down to 100. And then similar to the first situation, I basically only have my shutter speed to compensate and make it properly exposed. So I'm going to adjust my shutter, going from 1/100th to about 1/500th of a second. It's a little bit too dark. My camera meter is telling me that it's properly exposed, but because there's so much light coming from behind Will, it's saying it's exposed, but it's actually a little bit too bright. So I'm gonna drop down my shutter speed. Will, just look out over that way. Look right here. Got a little bit of light coming from behind Will, it's nice. One with your eyes open. All right, so with this lens, the f2.8 looks pretty good. We got a nice blurry background with the shutter at 1/250th and an ISO of 1/100th. We've got nice exposure on Will's face. So this was a quick demo of how I changed my settings to properly expose using the exposure triangle. For me, being outside, the first thing that I always do if I have enough light is dropping my ISO as low as can go. I usually will also open up my aperture as wide as possible so that I get a shallower depth of field, and that was the case in all of these situations. If I was going for more of a landscape where I wanted a deep depth of field, I would have adjusted that first. And then lastly, I use my shutter speed to basically compensate and get proper exposure. Of course, if you're in a different situation and you need a fast shutter speed, then that might be the setting that you change first. As you can tell, every situation is different. So the best thing is to go out, practice with your camera, with your lenses, so you know that whatever situation you're in, you'll be able to get proper exposure.
If you have any problems, be sure to post a question to the course and we'll be happy to help you out.